Vivek Shah, who is the CEO of Ziff Davis. Next to him is Seth Rogin, who is the president and CEO of Nucleus, which is a venture of McClatchy, Gannett, Hearst, and Tronk. So newspaper industry, but basically a programmatic venture. And sitting next to me is Chris Guenther, who's the SVP of Programmatic Solutions. I probably have the title wrong.
That's close enough.
But you're for NewsCorp. So what we have, just to put not too fine a point, a lot of newspaper and news industry history up here. V worked for Time Inc. for a long time before diving headfirst into the digital industry. Seth was at the New York Times for many years.
Let's not make me sound too old.
You're not that, believe me, with me on stage, you're not that old. And Chris has done a couple tours of duty at NewsCorp. So a lot of folks know a lot about supply chain because the newspaper industry for pretty much its entire history ran on the basis of expertise in supply chain management. In fact, little known factoid, for most of history, the largest industry on earth in terms of unit production was the newspaper industry, which makes sense only when you think about it. So I'd like to start with this panel. We really do want to invite a lot of back and forth as much as possible. We want to be as provocative as we can be, and I think deliberately so, because there's a lot of crappy stuff going on. And I'd like to start with just one question. It was at the IB annual leadership meeting about 3 months ago in January that Mark Pritchard, Chief Brand Officer of Procter Gamble, gave a presentation that we helped set up, in which he made 3 absolute new requirements of the digital ad industry. He made one of agencies as well, which we can get to, but 3 of the digital ad industry. One is, and all of this was in order to continue to get Procter & Gamble's ad money. In other words, you follow and you're eligible to work with Procter & Gamble, the largest advertiser on earth. You don't follow, you are no longer eligible. And those 3 things were, you follow, if you're an agency or anyone else, 1, viewability standard, the MRC standard. 2, you join the Trustworthy Accountability Group, the digital industry's anti-fraud self-regulatory program. And 3, you accede to third-party independent metrics, MRC accredited measurement verification. So the question for each of you, because you're all in the business, is 3 months later, how are we all doing? What's happening? Did Pritchard's speech make a dent in the marketplace? Is it moving the market? And if not, why not? Chris?
I'll start first. A small dent, I would say. I mean, I think I want to be realistic. It's, if you have years of bad practice, at 3 months is not going to change a lot. But I think that not nearly has happened as probably should have. Things need to accelerate.
Mm-hmm. Seth?
I mean, I guess what I would say is what the hell took us so long? To echo Chris, Nucleus was started, we're not just a programmatic operation, we were started in general to raise the news industry's game for the properties that we represent, which are basically the most circulated news property in every major American city. And we brought them together as one private marketplace, but we do other work for brands as well. And I sit here as someone who has a clean slate, right? My company is 1 year old last week. We're reinventing the way these hometown brands that are extremely trustable are able to serve brands. And yet they weren't getting business from those big brands because they didn't know how to execute on this level. And I think having standards, as long as they're the right standards and we know who's enforcing them, is a really important thing. So I guess to echo Chris, I would say it was a great step that Mark made. And now let's see the next generation of leaders doing the same thing and echoing it. It shouldn't be a moment in time that we look back and go, remember when Mark said those things? We were all going to clean it up? Like, let's do it now.
Mm-hmm. V, what do you think? I mean, as you look at the marketplace, is it making a difference or not?
Yeah, no, I think it does. I thought, one, if you were there, he did a great job delivering the message. So I think reiterating those principles, that's a great thing. That's a good thing. But I think attaching his spending to those principles is the important piece, right? Because I think a lot of people in our industry will get up and say, we support viewability, we don't believe in fraudulent traffic, and all of the things that everyone should agree on, right? If you are a legitimate, responsible actor in our industry, there's no dispute about the principles. But he's really the first major spender, and the biggest, to go out and say, I'm going to connect how I spend to those principles. It's early. I think there's some grace periods that are probably in place with a number of entities, probably particularly around that third piece, which is third-party accreditation, which is a big deal if you're some of the social platforms, right? But they're agreeing to it now, right? Prior to the speech, there was a lot of hemming and hawing about allowing a third party to measure my stuff. I'm a multi-billion-dollar social network. And that changed. So I think those things are good. In the end, if the buy side continues to trade efficacy for efficiency, we're still going to have a problem.
Well, let me ask you, because I want to follow up on what Seth was saying, which is, what the hell took us so long? So just to kind of pile on a bit onto the last panel, and Terry was mentioning the ANA, which is, we love them, we partner with them, but they are like latecomers upon latecomers to the supply chain management issue. IEB, we've been talking about this and beating people over the head with it for all the 10 years that I've been there. What the hell did take us so long? Now, I'm going to venture an answer, just rather than just listen to you guys. I think it's because people who are running brand marketing departments are just plain ignorant. That they've refused to in-source technical expertise, and that they're embarrassed by that. They kick it to the agencies, which are inherently conflicted. And so as a result, we've got piss-poor practices. You think there's another reason, or is that it?
I mean, I think that's a fair, I think there's a comparison in some ways to the mortgage crisis in 2008. All these very smart people. I think there's a lot of very smart people in this industry, but it's just moving so quickly in that it gets out of hand. Like, they don't really understand what sort of this out of control train was. So I think that's probably why.
I mean, there are sites that we all know about that are essentially the Enron of the advertising business, right? Where they take on the sale and then go out and try to mark up the inventory and try to find a way to serve it regardless of the quality. We all know about it. The problem is, in a discussion like this one, none of them are here, right? Because if you're here, you care about the way you execute. So I often wonder at events like these if we're really serving to make a change.
Do you want to name any?
Buy me a drink at the bar later. I'll tell you a couple.
But I think I actually think calling out and naming and shaming is pretty important here. I have a question. How many companies in the room? How many of you actually work at a company? It's here for lunch. Okay. How many companies in the room have joined TAG, Trustworthy Accountability Group? Okay, great. How many have not joined TAG? Hold your hands up. How many? You're holding your hand up, right? How many of you are IAB members? Okay. How many are IAB members who have not joined TAG? Okay. You realize we're kicking you out in a year, right? You saw the news? Looking at you in the back. So you're going to join, right? Because you don't want me to kick you out, right? You don't want me to kick you out.
I just want to make sure we have full compliance. We're a large organization.
Yeah, okay. But I mean, this stuff interests me. I mean, I'm not asking as a joke because I just find the lack of understanding, beginning at the top of what a supply chain is, how things get passed down, how you ascertain quality, engage in quality assurance, is something that has been foreign in this industry, and it's been a mystery to me why that. Why that? You've heard my diatribes for years.
Look, I'm always careful because I think as an industry we do a really good job beating ourselves up about everything. And other industries don't do that. They have their own issues and they have their own concerns, but they don't convene several hundred people.
Well, they do, but we don't follow them, so we don't know that they do it.
But here's what I'd say. I think that there needs to be some bifurcation, right? Because I think for the most part, established entities, content companies, social networks, holders of inventory are legitimate and have legitimate business practices. I think when you go to 400,000 entities, offering advertising, that's where you run into problems. It isn't that hard, right? Now, the reason you go to 400,000 is what I said. You like efficiency over efficacy. And so no one's asking did it really work and what did I get? But they're looking at a spreadsheet because they're getting hammered by their CFO or their CEO around metrics. And I think that's what happens. I think people need to meet goals. It's like a goal seek in an Excel spreadsheet, and this is the easiest way there. And so I actually think in many ways, we as the sell side, we seem to get a lot of the attention, but it's really the buy side, right? I mean, I think Chris was earlier saying you vote with your pocketbook, right? So the degree to which you don't want to, you're a major marketer and you don't want to engage, you don't want to buy non-human traffic or non-viewable traffic or non-measured traffic, that's easy. Don't buy it, right? And I don't think the people here, for the most part, are selling that.
When you're referring to JPMorgan Chase culling.
Yeah.
I mean, basically following the
But
guide.
5,000's a lot too, by the way.
Yeah. But what's so interesting about it to me was, we gave the advice at the same annual leadership meeting. We said the first thing you need to do is you need to qualify your suppliers. Talking about it in the context of fake news, but even went beyond that. You have to qualify your customers and qualify your suppliers. Everyone in any business does that, and the way to do it: get a list of payables, review them. But in the JPMorgan Chase story, what struck me as so unusual was that no one mentioned, I didn't read a single story that said, you're placing your ads on 400,000 sites? That's clinically insane. And so how did we get to a point where companies would essentially invest their brands on so many unknown dark places?
Because those 400,000 on your AP list, on your account payables list, are represented by a handful. Mm-hmm. They're never seeing 400,000.
Right. Yeah. But I think blaming your customer is the surest way to doom your business. I sat inside the New York Times when it was more of a print business and watched. There was that time, between 2007 and 2008, and the market collapsed and automated buying came out, and so not only did prices dip, but sell-through dipped as well. I think they've said publicly 50% of the revenue went away in a year. And I sat in meetings where people said, what is wrong with these advertisers? And I thought, how full of shit are we? Right? We are in a business that sells a product. So if the clients are buying 400,000 sites, it's because they don't believe in the solution I'm providing. And I have a better job to do to tell that story. Where I think, and you and I have discussed this before, where I think there's a divide is in what is willful ignorance, right? And I'm sure there's some of that, but I think it oversimplifies it to say that. I think there's another side, which is not buying quality product in the name of being efficient. That's a different story, right? Where people are supporting horrible content and then act surprised when that content is horrible, right? You look at, and I mean, it's a separate side of your corporate world, but you look at what just happened on Fox News, right? So all these advertisers backed out.
Actually, to be fair, it's a completely different corporation.
I'm saying it's different corporation, same head, right? Sorry, I don't want to. But look at what happened there, right? So you have a guy who finally got exposed for who he was, and advertisers backed out. But advertisers have been supporting that business for 18 years of homophobia, sexism, racism. Well, I would say the ROI on that is return on intolerance. How is it okay for a brand to stand up and defend a guy and fund his salary and his home when all he wants to advance is bigotry and fake news? And I think that's something that is controllable by brands. That's something where we can all stand up for. The technology piece simply needs to get solved.
I have a different view of that one. Only, not that I'm defending anything or anything, but I think what actually happened there was they made a decision, the advertisers made it, actually, because I was involved in covering the first advertiser boycott in television, which a couple people in this room might remember, which was the boycott of Married with Children, which was also on the Fox network. It was the first organized boycott of a television program because of content. At that time, it was salacious content. I think what happened here was that advertisers were absolutely knowingly buying into the program. It's just that when O'Reilly himself was exposed as a serial sexual harasser, that was what crossed the line. It wasn't his opinions, but it was his behaviors that they felt the PR was something that they could not. And I think it was, and some of them even said this, it was within their own organizations that there was a problem. They couldn't look inside their own organizations and their own sexual harassment policies and be seen condoning that behavior on the outside. So it's interesting, but I think your fundamental point is absolutely spot on, which is it is your job to qualify your suppliers and to say, we want them. And I'm still kind of wondering, and I get the point, I don't want to belabor it, that it is a trade-off between effectiveness and efficiency, and that it is possible that, you know, for a price you can get anything, which is a little disconcerting.
So yeah, to quickly move away from the conversation, a cousin company. You know, so focusing on JPMorgan for a second, and you know, when we were talking about it yesterday, and the fact that it gives you a sense of our kind of slightly skewed perspective that, oh, they cut it down, but to 5,000. I actually just did a quick little search on Quantcast. You know, what was like 5,000 sites, and the 5,000, you know, that site was kissmanja.com. And now, I didn't click on it because I was at work, but I can assume that's not a site that JPMorgan's advertising. So where are they going to?
Right.
So I think there is a responsibility on that end. I'd love to kind of hear what criteria they're using now to vet it. But, you know, a little bit echoing your point, I think publishers, you know, we have to take on responsibility as well in terms of what we're offering to our clients and the services. And I think that, you know, I think publishers started getting their asses kicked a couple of years ago when viewability really started coming into play and ad blocking. A lot of that started because of really some bad practices by the publisher side. And now that site designs are getting better and the services to our clients are getting better. But now I think it is sort of the clients have to start recognizing that as well.
Let's turn to one of Pritchard's other demands, which was the MRC viewability standard. This is one that kind of swung back and bit the industry in the ass, because I think all of us weren't prepared for how the agencies in particular were just going to game the system on this.
How many standards are there? I'm curious. I've sort of lost count. If you were to sort of, how many? Given all the different agencies, I mean, dozens?
We did it. It wasn't as much as was thought. And it really. It was Clintonian in the sense it depends upon what the definition of is. We counted, when we did a review of the CROs, we actually counted 6 or 7, not dozens. But there were variations on the theme within holding companies. And I think, you know, it kind of exposed one of the larger points that we keep bumping up against, which is that within the holding company structure, it's easy enough to get folks at the holding company level to agree to things, but the contracts are written by account teams in offices, and there are very few controls that seem to be exercised within the holding companies over those contracts. So you get a proliferation of these things. But what I wanted to ask, have you seen or do you expect to see, with the largest advertiser on earth saying to its agencies, one standard, the MRC standard, do you think that's going to move the market finally in that direction of a single viewability standard?
I do. Look, I mean, I get the arguments for why some aren't satisfied with the standard, because they're misunderstanding.
Right.
It's the opportunity to see an ad that we're trying to establish through viewability, not how long did someone actually see it and how do they engage. That's a whole different set of analysis and dynamics.
But let me interrupt you. Why do you think, because that is such an easy concept to
it's an opportunity to negotiate, that's why. It's an opportunity back to efficiency. Look, everyone's under pressure in our business. I don't know how many people live in the agency world in this room, but they're under a lot of pressure, right? I mean, their expectations of do all these things and, oh yeah, we're not going to pay for those, and so then they look for ways to add on fees, which was the last discussion. And it all comes down to, I hate to say it, but price is such a driver in our industry right now. Price, price, price. What the marketer wants to pay, how the agency's going to make a margin, how's the publisher going to make a margin, how's the middle going to make a margin, they need to make a margin too. Everyone, I mean, there are a lot of people that need to get fed. And so I think with a price-driven industry and set of activities, when someone comes out with something as simple as viewability, which by the way is to the benefit of the buy side, they're not going to resist the opportunity to use that for further price negotiation and discussion, which is fine, but we're not going to play unless it's 100% of the pixels or 5 seconds or whatever variations they want to make. And so, look, I think what Mark did was great because I think he speaks, he obviously has an important position and he knows what he's talking about. And I think there are a lot of CMOs in their defense. They don't understand all these issues. It sounds complicated. It's not something I want to dive into. But here's somebody who's CMO of one of the largest advertisers in the world who's taken the time to understand the issues, come to a conclusion, and then communicate that.
I mean, to be fair, one of the largest manufacturing companies in the world, which is a large part of the conversation that he and I were having for months because it was easy to have a conversation with him about supply chain. In a way, it's not with most bred-in-the-bone marketers. Somebody who's done the Stations of the Cross at Procter Gamble knows everything there is to know about the bases of supply chain management. Somebody who's just been in media and marketing doesn't necessarily think in that way.
That's a good point.
And that's one of the challenges that we felt over the years. I mean, there's a contradiction that I'm interested in because it's often, measurement is not often thought of as part of supply chain management, but it is because it attests to the quality of a product and the value add to that product as it flows through the chain from raw material to the end consumer. So the other thing he said about metrics was, of course, MRC accreditation and verification. This was a principle at IAB back before I came in. And a lot of companies, I remember CNN, I think, was the first to go through MRC accreditation. Very expensive, very torturous process, but it was thought that it was going to be the gold standard, and it never became the gold standard because the brands weren't buying. Do you think now they're going to start buying on this basis? Do you think that this is another one that will make a difference? Or will, again, in the contest between efficiency and effectiveness, will they just start looking the other way again? What I'm interested in really, the thing I'm trying to get to is, are we now at the verge of a movement where the people with the money are going to start spending it insanely rather than insanely?
Well, I mean, it's sort of, of course, we hope so. So we need to, if there are any buyers in the room, or
Are there any?
We established this in the last
Okay,
session.
sorry.
Yeah.
I don't mean
There's one
to
guy in the
insult
back, I'll see you
but
later.
I'm insulting you just to make a point. What will it take?
No,
I mean, that's
do.
what I mean.
So, or will they be rational actors, right? I think so. I think now that people understand that even possibly buying 5,000 sites defies the goal of only running in quality places and getting your money's worth, right? Like, I think now that they understand what all the implications and trade-offs are, I think you are going to see that. And so I think we're moving in the right direction. Again, I think we do a really good job of beating ourselves up, and I think we hold ourselves, the responsible part of the industry very much holds itself, I think, highly accountable. I think it's this longer tail that's hard to govern at times. But I think everyone involved now is recognizing that it needs to be governed. So I don't know. I'm an optimist, so I don't think all is lost. And I actually think, and I give social media a lot of credit. I think some of the ad formats that are being developed in our world are really good, and I think that's a big part of it. I think what Facebook's done and Snapchat's done and Twitter, I think they're really great, and I'm starting to see those kind of formats show up outside of those platforms, which is great. So I think there's a lot to like too. I'm just back to back. I mean, if someone who's not in our industry, if somebody walked into this room accidentally and listened to the last hour, they'd run out of this industry screaming and scared, and we don't want that,
Yeah.
right? And I'm not being naive. I know. I mean, I know the challenges, and when we were talking about fraud 3 years ago, people thought we were making it up. I had people literally look at me and say, "There's no fraud." I go,
I
gotta
asked
be,
that
you know.
when you guys shanghaied me at the IAB leadership meeting like 7 years ago and said, we're forcing you to come to a lunch to talk about this. That was my first thing. Is this just another vendor-driven problem? And I can't remember if it was you or Tom Phillips.
Tom Phillips started.
Yeah, slapped me across the mouth. I started bleeding. And he said, no, it's real.
And
I
John
said,
Patel.
okay. Yeah, but and Patel hit me over the head with a brick.
Yeah.
And it was hurt. I hurt. And I believed it then.
Yeah,
So,
but it was, so same thing, right? It's a process of everyone denies it, and then they recognize it, and then you start to put in place the instrumentation to deal with it, and then there's kind of that lull, and then it takes some momentum to kind of get it moving. So again, I think we are moving in the right direction, and I do think improvements are being made, and I think we need to put pressure on the buy side, right? Because you hear all the issues, and they sound like sell side issues. They're buy side issues. We've just all said if they buy the if they're buying from people they know and trust, who are tag certified,
right.
who have MRC accredited viewability measurement, solve the problems.
Randy, can I add a thought here? This is Rajiv over here, voice of
Oh, hey,
government on
Rajiv.
your right.
Yep.
So let me propose that perhaps the actors in the industry are more rational than you make them out to be. I think
I was trying to provoke exactly this
you
response.
provoked. So I think what's changing, and I'd love for you guys to discuss this point, is that we now have brand spend overtaking direct response spend in the programmatic channel. And virtually all of the issues that we've been talking about are not issues with direct response advertising.
Right.
Viewability, who cares?
Exactly.
Fraud, great. If a bot has a credit card and it wants to buy, then let it buy.
But you know what?
But otherwise, there's no issue.
But I want to interrupt you there. That itself has been an enormously difficult conversation to have with brand marketers.
Well, I think so.
Because they don't understand
Yeah.
why would you ever buy non-viewable inventory? And the next question is, have you ever been in a magazine circulation department? Have you ever been in a direct
So
response?
perhaps their ignorance is just a reflection of a point in time
Yes.
in terms of how the brand marketer is allocating spend across print, TV, radio, et cetera, right? So all of these issues, ad blocking, not an issue in the direct response space, right? So I think a lot of the tools and workflow and processes that are out there today that are primarily built on the last 5 to 7 years of programmatic, which has been really about direct response, are clearly lacking in a world that's headed to more and more brand spend, and I think we're sitting right in the middle of that challenge today.
Yeah, I think that's very astute. And we predicted. I remember going back to the earliest days of the viewability as the first step of 3MS. Our prediction was, those of you who were involved with all of this in the early days, was that it would bifurcate the industry into a brand. There would be sites, pages, and actual individual pieces of inventory that would be allocated to brands and those that would be allocated to direct response. It's taken longer for that divide to happen. Yeah. We have a mic need here. Can you introduce yourself too?
Sure, yeah. I'm Timmer Yarnell from comScore. I want to thank the IAB and everyone for all the work we've done. I personally been working on the fraud issue for the last 5 years, and I agree with what Vivek said 100%, that I think 3 years ago, I personally got kicked out of meetings, and Vivek looked at you like you're crazy, you talk about the issue. I think we've come so far as an industry, but we're still maybe in that second stage of grief, denial, acceptance that we get to as an industry, and we've done really well. But I think part of Mark Pritchard's response earlier this year was the meth bot story that came out in December, and it was a terrible timing. First of all, it was December 21st, and it yanked everybody away from their holiday to respond. And to me, I had to write the response for comScore, and I look at it in reality, it was fake news. I mean, there was this kind of got you effect that I think still pervades the industry, and I wonder what can we do to have a more constructive, meaningful way of bringing to light that fraud does exist, but let's turn it away from a gotcha to we came together and solved this and knocked this botnet out, which is, we'd actually been tracking that botnet for 18 months. So both on the sell side, what can we do to reward somebody for bringing that story to light and make it constructive. And then secondly, though, educate the buy side so that their middle tier buyers are not punished. Their middle tier managers are not punished when they go to the CMO and say, I have detected that there was some fraud here. Because I think on the buy side, those mid-market folks, those mid-level managers are still punished when there's any amount of fraud. So I think those 2 points are where I'd see we can really make some progress in the next 12 to 18 months.
What do you all think? How would that travel? My answer is a simple one. It's register with tag, and don't use suppliers who aren't registered, because at least that gives you a trusted framework that you could work within. Not that it will eliminate all fraud or all bad things, but it will give you the opportunity to investigate up and down the supply
I think
chain.
it's a great point, because with the IAB now making a requirement of membership that you be tax certified, that's a big move, right? And so I don't know how much time we're giving for compliance.
We're giving a year.
We're giving a year. If in that same year, the ANA and the 4As would say, and therefore we will only buy from tag certified sites, I think you go pretty far, right? That's what needs to happen, right? Because we can do it on our side. The 400,000 sites won't do it. And so you're going to definitionally limit the universe, but it's going to be the universe that they should be buying from. It just needs to, the buying behavior needs to attach to what we're talking about. It's all,
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
I mean, it's all well and good if the entire membership, adopts tag certification. But if the buy side doesn't adjust its buying in the way that Mark's talking about P&G, it won't work.
Yeah, but I think we have to take responsibility on both sides. I agree with you. I would not want to be a CMO right now making these decisions, right, as you're looking in. So in saying the buy side piece needs to change, I think that is a part of a two-sided puzzle, right, of an equation. Somehow they were seeing better value out of buying 5,000 or 400,000. So we have a story to tell as well, which is that being with a trusted site, being with a tag certified site, which I think the mistake we can all make is thinking that tag is the end of the discussion. Tag is the first couple of inches of a marathon of proving quality to brands,
Right.
and demonstrating who we are and that we stand for certain standards. Whether it is standing for real news, or it's standing for bot-free traffic, or it's standing for viewability or fully viewed video, or other things that we can do that make sure we're delivering quality for our advertisers. But at some point, right, so I represent an organization that's all about real news, and at the same time, if I don't prove the value to my advertiser, they don't care how noble I am, right? No one can deposit nobility in the bank. So I have to execute at a level of the top digital technology and make sure that I'm delivering real value, and the additive value is that it's real news or that it's really noble. And I think until we prove that value to those brands, we haven't completely solved that equation.
I mean, I want to ask, you mentioned fake news a couple times. My contention is that fake news is just another example of supply chain failure, that it has to do with automated systems, placing ads on places that are not reviewed by brands, and they're kind of operating on a wing and a prayer and hoping they don't get caught. Is it different than that, or is it pretty much as described?
I think there's probably two camps of fake news, right? You have the fake news, which is intended simply to lure ad dollars, and then you have the fake news, which is intended to change minds in the wrong direction and to disinform people. And they're both dangerous. But just as dangerous, I think, is forming some sort of regulatory concept that would look at what information is real and isn't. Yeah. That's where the human talent of a CMO and their team has to come in, which is to look at it. We all know where real news comes from and where the fake stuff comes from. We all know when we look at it individually, and somehow when it's on a spreadsheet, we become sort of forest blind to it all.
So I got a stupid old man question that I got to ask, which is, I mean, whatever happened to the concept of media plans? Is it just they're never going to exist ever again? It's a stupid old man question. I'm sorry.
I think we have to have some sort of whitelist of who you work with. To me, my brand, if I'm a marketer, my brand is a covenant of trust with the people that are working to create that product and with my consumer. And if I'm breaking that by placing ads in places that advance things that are antithetical to what my consumer wants, antithetical to what I stand for, that's a problem. That's a real danger to my brand. I've lost my ability to sort of carry the torch forward for that brand.
Okay, last question I want to ask each of you. I want to end on practical, actionable notes. I really want to know if you were to give a set of 3 lessons, 3 rules for publishers or brands or agencies. I'll give you flexibility here. You can direct these rules and lessons to anyone in the supply chain you want. But what would those 3 rules or lessons be? I mean, you're doing the Pritchard thing.
Yeah, I'm not going to complicate it. I'm just going to repeat what Pritchard said and go further than what JPMorgan Chase did.
Mm-hmm. So you're going to winnow the 5,000 down further? Is
Yeah.
that it?
Yeah. What was the 5,000th site?
Kissmanja.com.
Yeah.
Oh,
We're going to
it's
go
so
a little
good,
bit
that
more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kiss Manja? like,
M-A-N-G-A.
oh, that could be pretty cool. I mean,
Very well made.
yeah, okay.
But the
It's
thing
going to
is-
get like 1,000 pages.
This is a lucky day.
But the funny thing, I mean, all what we talk about, all these solutions, they're really not that complicated. I mean, that's sort of and I think the idea, we talk about monitoring fake news and things like that, but yet, don't look at it that approach. Look at it from the white label, because everyone can list pretty quickly a pretty long list of very reputable publishers that they can work with.
So you're saying the same thing as Vic.
Yeah,
you
I think
would
it's the
say,
same. And people's got, and the other thing is everyone's going to kind of get their shit together. I think across all areas. I think that, publishers aren't perfect. We have work to do. Ad tech, agencies, and then the buyers as well.
Seth,
I think if there are 3 rules, I would say get certified, get real, and get to work. Right? Get certified is work with TAG and some of the other partners and make sure you can prove and put your money where your mouth is the way you want these advertisers to do it. Get real is please start supporting real journalism. And we all know, is it harder to work to find it sometime? Yeah. But we all see what happens in this country when people are disinformed. And get to work is this isn't easy, but it's also not that complicated. I think Chris is dead on. And if we all put our minds to it, it's completely solvable.
so I want to conclude with the unpardonable sin of quoting myself. I know it's unpardonable, but it's because I did research this recently, wrote it in a blog, and because I think there are only 3 people who read my blog, and one of them is my dad. Nobody saw this, but I think the statistics are interesting. There are about 121 billion cans of food and beverage shipped commercially in the United States each year. Do you know how many cases of botulism can be attributed to those canned comestibles? Approximately 1. Not 1%, 1. Fewer than 0.0000, I mean, I can't even read the number of zeros. It's like 10 zeros, 1% of all commercially canned food and drink are seriously harmful to human beings. That's how good the food supply chain, which is a very open supply chain, is. Do you know how many seriously harmful advertising impressions float through cyberspace each year? Depends upon how you count it, obviously. Between 3% and 37% of impressions are fraudulently generated by bots, according to the White Ops work for A&A. However bad that work might be, or however flawed the methodology, there's something in there. I mean, and if you add to that the valid impressions that run on porn sites or adjacent to pirated copyrighted entertainment or near falsified content and other forms of fake news, let's just say the incidence of bad advertising is at least a few 100 billion times greater than the incidence of bad canned food. And so I think just as a conclusion is we actually have to aspire to be as good as the canned food industry. It's not an irrational aspiration. So thank you for helping us along the way. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think that was a really amazing panel. I am going to open up. I know the floor has been participating, but we don't want them to leave without giving you a second for any additional questions. Aspiring to be as good as the canned food industry. If that one does not get tweeted like 500 times, that's all right. Listen, thank you so much. I want to thank the panel again. Thank you, Randy. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Seth. Vivek, thank you as always. Thank you so much. All right, as they walk off, let me walk you through. I'll let you guys walk off. Let me walk you through the next session. Oh, 1 second. I'm sorry. Oh, there was a question. I apologize. Don't go too far. You're all mic still. Yes, please go for it.
All right, is this working? All right. So, try to figure out how to ask this question. So a lot of what you guys talk about, Greg Leffelt's Owner IQ. A lot of what you guys talk about to me sounds very like philosophical, and it's hard to apply that in like the real world of day-to-day getting campaigns running, right? So we're essentially a data platform. Retailers and brands share data. They activate that on platform and off the platform, right? And when we have advertisers, big brands come in, some use double verify, some use IES, some do blocking up front, some don't. We have White Ops, comScore, 4 or 5 different companies that are used regularly. And, you guys say, well, just don't buy the fraud, right? Or only buy the viewable traffic. Those companies, if I ran and have run those companies on your guys' sites, they don't come back with the same results. They have different definitions. So even though the MRC IAB says, hey, here's the definition of viewability, supposedly there may or may not be a definition of fraud, but they all come back with different numbers. And you add geo-targeting into there, right? Whichever source they're getting it from. They might be using 3 sources. If they all agree, then they use 1, so it's just hard because there's not like a definition of truth for a lot of these things, whether it's geo, brand safety, fraud. And when you're in the middle and you're showing, the supply chain and the amount of loss that all creates for everybody, I mean, that's a frustrating part of hearing, what it sounds so simple, and you tell that to the marketer and they're like, yeah, it's so simple. You just only advertise in this state, only advertise in this DMA, with 75% viewability. And a lot of those things are just hard to make real all the time.
You're not going to like my answer, but you're right. It's been a terrible cost of doing business. It's for exactly what this panel outlined, which is the general ignorance of the buy side and the kicking down to their agencies, and the agencies, unfortunately, having their favorite suppliers. The reason we work so hard to try and get Procter & Gamble to say one viewability standard is that's where it needs to begin. It's only when the buyers are going to see the insanity of those excess costs, which fundamentally get passed on to them, and wasted time. That's what Pritchard saw. It's the wasted time. Yeah, the other part, which I think is the part you're really not going to like, is it's up to you to say no. You got to fire some of your customers, and I know how hard that is. Believe me, I know that that's a really easy thing to say and a hard thing to do, but if you accept the fragmentation, you accept the excess cost, it's just going to continue. It's only when you start introducing pain and friction into a supply chain will behaviors change. I've basically said, V is on our executive committee, so I've only got a couple years left in this job, so I figured they're not going to fire me. I'm just going to spout off my big mouth and name and shame. But I think until everybody starts naming and shaming and kind of firing customers, or in our case, firing IAB members, saying you're not in this organization anymore, the change isn't going to happen. So yeah, it's going to take some time. There's going to be cost attached to it, but that's the only way to make the change happen.
The only thing I'd add is you're talking about there's just a lot of measurers. Well, there were far more measurers a year ago than there are today.
Good
we
point.
are coalescing around fewer of those. So that's an issue, right? IAS, double verify, moat, comScore, different numbers, all looking at the same stuff. And how do you reconcile these discrepancies? And what are you optimizing to? And what can you bill on? We've had that in first and third party ad serving. Right, that's been there since the beginning of our industry. So you're always going to have that when you have different people doing measurement, but the universe of people actually doing measuring is smaller, and it is coalescing, and I agree. I mean, we make a position, this is who we work with. If you're not going to allow us to bill off that, we can't do business that way. Do we make exceptions? Of course you're going to make exceptions for volume players, but for non-volume players, no, we don't make an exception. And they come back around after a certain moment.
Thanks.
Thanks for the question. Thank you so much. Thanks again to the panel.